The amber glow of the bar's neon sign flickered against the rain-slicked pavement, casting dancing shadows across the sidewalk. Inside Murphy's Tavern, the air was thick with laughter and the clink of glass against wood. But in the corner booth, Marcus Williams sat perfectly still, his fingers wrapped around a glass of water he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His brother Damon leaned back against the worn leather seat, eyes scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone who had learned long ago that relaxation was a luxury he couldn't afford. They weren't here for the drinks or the Saturday night crowd. They were here because sometimes the best way to understand a community was to sit quietly in its gathering places and listen. The bass from the jukebox thrummed through the floorboards, an old Motown classic, one their mother used to hum while cooking Sunday dinner. Marcus allowed himself a small smile at the memory. For a moment, just a moment, they were simply two brothers sharing a quiet evening out. Then the door burst open. 3 officers entered, their uniforms dark against the warm light of the bar. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It faded like a song being slowly turned down, conversation dying table by table as heads turned. The lead officer's hand rested on his holster, not quite casual, not quite threatening. His eyes swept the room and landed on the corner booth, on the 2 black men sitting alone. Marcus felt Damon tense beside him, that imperceptible shift that only a twin would notice. 20 years of training had taught them to read situations in microseconds. This wasn't a routine check. This was something else. The officer started walking toward them, his partners flanking him. Each step deliberate, each second stretching like pulled taffy. The other patrons turned away, some quickly, some slowly, but all deliberately. The bartender found something urgent to clean at the far end of the bar. "Evening, gentlemen," the lead officer said, but there was no evening in his voice, only barely contained assumption. "Mind if we have a word?" Marcus's hand stayed flat on the table, fingers spread wide, visible, non-threatening. His FBI badge sat in his inner jacket pocket, 8 inches and a lifetime away. Beside him, Damon's breathing remained steady, controlled. They had been trained for dangerous situations, but this was a different kind of danger. The kind that didn't care about badges or training or the oath they'd sworn to protect and serve. The kind that only saw the color of their skin on a Saturday night in a bar where they didn't belong. What happened next would change everything, not just for Marcus and Damon Williams, but for everyone in Murphy's Tavern that night, because sometimes the best way to understand a community was to sit quietly in its gathering places and listen.
6 hours earlier, Marcus Williams stood in his Arlington apartment, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. His reflection stared back, 34 years old, clean-shaven, the kind of careful precision that came from a lifetime of representing more than just himself. "You're going to wear a hole in that mirror," Damon called from the kitchen, the sound of coffee brewing accompanying his voice. Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional one he wore at the bureau. "Says the man who spent 20 minutes choosing between 2 identical white shirts this morning." "They're not identical," Damon protested, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. "One has mother-of-pearl buttons, the other is plastic." "Mom would be proud," Marcus said, accepting the coffee. "Her boys, arguing about button quality." They stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking at their reflection. Identical faces, identical builds, but if you knew them, really knew them, you could see the differences. Marcus carried his weight in his shoulders, the responsibility of being older by 3 minutes, somehow manifesting physically. Damon held his in his jaw, set with the determination of someone who'd spent his life proving those 3 minutes didn't matter. 10 years, Damon said quietly. 10 years since we graduated from Quantico. Feels like yesterday. Feels like a lifetime. Both were true. The decade had transformed them from eager recruits to seasoned special agents, specialists in organized crime investigation. They'd worked cases from Miami to Seattle, infiltrated operations that would make headlines they'd never see their names in. But today wasn't about a case. Today was about something their supervisor, special agent in charge Patricia Chen, called community immersion. "Remind me again why we're doing this?" Damon asked, though he knew the answer. "Because Chen thinks we've been buried in surveillance footage and wiretaps too long. Says we need to remember why we do this job." By sitting in a bar in Riverside Heights? By understanding the community we're about to investigate, Marcus corrected. The Torelli family's been running operations through there for 18 months. We go in cold, we miss things. We go in knowing the neighborhood, we see what doesn't belong. It was an old lesson one their training officer at Quantico had drilled into them. You can't spot the abnormal until you know what normal looks like. Riverside Heights sat on the edge of the city, a neighborhood in transition. Old row houses stood next to new developments, family-owned shops competed with chain stores, and Murphy's Tavern had somehow survived it all, a 40-year-old institution that served as the unofficial community center. If the Torelli family was moving product through the neighborhood, someone at Murphy's would know about it. Maybe not consciously, maybe not directly, but something would be off. A regular who stopped coming, new faces that didn't fit, conversations that died too quickly. "Remember," Marcus said, setting down his mug, "we're not there as agents tonight. We're just two brothers having a drink. I know. Doesn't mean I have to like it." Marcus understood. They'd worked hard to earn their badges, harder still to earn respect in a bureau that, despite its best efforts, still struggled with diversity. Walking into any situation without that identification felt like leaving home without armor. But sometimes the job required you to be vulnerable. Sometimes it required you to be human first, agent second. They drove to Riverside Heights in Marcus's personal car, a modest sedan that wouldn't draw attention. The neighborhood unfolded around them. Kids playing basketball in a church parking lot, an elderly woman watering flowers in a window box, a man washing his car while oldies played from a portable radio. Normal, peaceful. The kind of Saturday afternoon that made you forget that somewhere in these streets, drugs were being moved, money was being laundered, lives were being destroyed. There, Damon pointed to a brick building on the corner, Murphy's Tavern painted in fading green letters on the side. Marcus parked 2 blocks away, habit from years of surveillance, and they walked back slowly, taking in the environment. The barber shop next door was closing up, the owner nodding to them as he pulled down the security gate. Across the street, a small grocery store still had customers wandering in and out. Everything looked exactly as it should on a Saturday evening in a working-class neighborhood. Inside Murphy's, the atmosphere was warm, lived in. The bar itself was solid oak, polished by decades of elbows and spilled drinks. Photos lined the walls. Local sports teams, neighborhood celebrations, regulars who'd passed on but were never forgotten. The bartender, a man in his 60s with arms like tree trunks and kind eyes, looked up as they entered. "Evening, fellas. Haven't seen you before." "Just moved to the area," Marcus said easily. "Heard this was the place to be on a Saturday night." The bartender's face creased into a smile. "Well, you heard right. What'll it be?" They ordered water for Marcus, who never drank on any kind of duty, even unofficial, and a beer for Damon to maintain their cover. And they found the corner booth. It offered clear sight lines to both entrances and most of the bar. Another habit, another piece of training so ingrained that it had become instinct. For the first hour, they simply observed. The crowd was diverse: construction workers, office employees, a group of nurses clearly off shift, 2 older men playing chess in the corner. Conversations flowed over and around each other, a symphony of community. Marcus got fragments. Someone's kid had made the honor roll. Someone else was worried about their hours being cut. The city council was considering another development project that probably would never happen. Normal. All of it beautifully, wonderfully normal.
The shift in the atmosphere was subtle at first.
Marcus noticed it in the way the bartender's smile tightened when the door opened at 9:47 p.m. He saw it in how the chess players suddenly found their game less interesting. He felt it in the way conversations stuttered, resumed, then stuttered again. 3 officers. Local PD, not state. The lead, badge number 4827, Marcus's trained eye cataloged automatically, was mid-40s, built like a former high school linebacker who'd kept most of the muscle and added some strategic weight. His partners were younger, eager in that dangerous way that came from wanting to prove themselves without understanding what that really meant. They weren't here on a call. No one had complained. No disturbance had been reported. Marcus knew because he'd been watching, listening, cataloging everything for the past 2 hours. They were here because they wanted to be. Because Saturday nights meant checking on certain places, certain people. The lead officer, Thompson, according to his nameplate, scanned the room with the slow, deliberate gaze of someone who wanted everyone to know they were being watched. His eyes lingered on tables, measuring, assessing. When they reached Marcus and Damon, they stopped. "Shit," Damon muttered under his breath, so quiet only Marcus could hear. Marcus kept his expression neutral, took a sip of water. They'd been through this before, in other cities, other situations. The key was to remain calm, non-threatening, to de-escalate before there was anything to escalate from. But knowing the playbook and running it were 2 different things, especially when your badge, your protection, your identity sat useless in your pocket. Thompson approached their table with the measured stride of someone who'd done this many times before. His partners spread out slightly, one positioning himself where he could watch the door, the other angling to have a clear view of both the booth and the bar. Textbook intimidation positioning. "Evening, gentlemen," Thompson said, his voice carrying that particular tone, not quite hostile, not quite friendly, perfectly calibrated to make you uncertain. "Mind if we have a word?" "Evening, officer," Marcus responded, keeping his voice level, pleasant. "Is there a problem?" "That's what we're here to determine." Thompson's hand rested on his equipment belt, fingers drumming against the hard plastic of his handcuff case. "You boys from around here?" Boys. The word hung in the air like smoke. Marcus was 34 years old, a decorated federal agent with commendations from the deputy director himself. Damon had a master's degree in criminal psychology and had testified before Congress on organized crime tactics. But to Officer Thompson, they were boys. "We're new to the neighborhood," Damon said, his voice matching Marcus's careful tone. "Just enjoying a quiet drink." "That's so." Thompson's partner, the eager one on the left, Rodriguez, barely 25, stepped closer. "Funny thing about quiet drinks, sometimes they turn into not-so-quiet problems." The bar had gone completely silent now. Even the jukebox seemed to have sensed the tension, the gap between songs stretching uncomfortably long. Marcus could feel every eye in the place deliberately not looking at them. The kind of studied ignorance that came from not wanting to be involved, but being unable to look away entirely. "We're not looking for any trouble," Marcus said. "No one ever is, until they are. See, we've had some issues in this neighborhood lately. Break-ins, drug activity. And when we see unfamiliar faces—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but clear. Marcus felt Damon's leg tense beside him under the table. His brother's hand was on his thigh, probably inches from the backup piece he kept in an ankle holster even off duty. Marcus pressed his foot against Damon's, a silent message, not yet, not unless we have to.
"I understand you have a job to do," Marcus said carefully. I need to see some ID," Thompson cut him off. "Both of you." It should have been simple. Reach for their wallets, show their FBI credentials, watch the officers' faces change from suspicious authority to embarrassed deference. Should have been.
But Marcus had been black in America for 34 years, and he knew that reaching for anything, even when asked, could be misconstrued, especially by eager young officers looking to prove themselves. "I'm going to reach for my wallet," Marcus said slowly, clearly. "It's in my inside jacket pocket." Thompson's hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it, but unsnapping the holster. Slowly. Marcus moved like molasses, every motion deliberate and visible. His fingers found his wallet, drew it out with excruciating care. He could feel sweat beating on his forehead, not from fear, but from the effort of suppressing every instinct that screamed at him to identify himself as federal law enforcement. But Chen had been clear about their assignment. Observe the community, understand the dynamics. And right now, he was understanding more than he'd ever wanted to about the dynamics of Riverside Heights. He opened his wallet, deliberately keeping his FBI credentials hidden, and pulled out his driver's license, handed it over with steady hands. Damon did the same, his movements mirroring Marcus's excessive care. Thompson took the licenses, studied them with unnecessary scrutiny. Arlington addresses, long way from home. "It's a 20-minute drive," Damon said, and Marcus heard the edge creeping into his brother's voice. 20 minutes or 20 years doesn't matter," Rodriguez chimed in, eager to be part of the interaction. "Question is, what you're doing here?" "Having a drink," Marcus repeated, "which last I checked wasn't illegal." Thompson's face darkened. "You got a smart mouth, Mr. Williams." "No, sir," Marcus said quickly, recognizing the escalation. "I apologize if it came across that way." But Thompson had already decided where this was going. He could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was about authority, about reminding everyone in the bar who held the power. "I think you gentlemen need to step outside," Thompson said. "Let us conduct a proper investigation." "Investigation of what?" Damon asked, and now the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "What crime do you suspect us of committing?" "Damon," Marcus warned quietly, but it was too late. "Your brother's got a point," Thompson said, but his smile was predatory. "Maybe we should start with public intoxication." "I've had one beer," Damon said flatly. "That's what they all say. Stand up, both of you." Marcus's mind raced through options. They could identify themselves now, end this before it went further. But something held him back. Maybe training, maybe instinct, maybe just the bone-deep exhaustion of having to prove his right to exist in spaces like this. They'd done nothing wrong. They shouldn't have to flash federal credentials just to have a drink in peace. They stood slowly, hands visible. The other patrons watched from their peripheral vision, bearing witness, but unwilling to intervene. Marcus understood. These were good people, but they lived here. They'd have to deal with these officers tomorrow and the day after. The Williams brothers were strangers, and in the arithmetic of survival, strangers were expendable. "Hands on the table," Thompson ordered. They complied. Marcus felt Rodriguez move behind him, too close, violating personal space in that way that was meant to provoke a reaction. The younger officer's breath was hot on his neck, sour with coffee and something else, excitement maybe, or fear masquerading as aggression. The pat-down was deliberately rough, aggressive. Rodriguez's hands didn't search, they invaded, pushed, prodded. Looking for weapons, he'd say later, but Marcus knew better. This was about humiliation, about establishing dominance, about reminding two black men that, regardless of their education, their careers, their service to their country, in this moment, they were nothing more than suspects. Rodriguez's hand found the bulge in Marcus's jacket. "Gun!"
The word cracked like a whip through the bar. Thompson's weapon cleared his holster, pointing at Damon. The third officer drew as well, his weapon trained on Marcus. Someone in the bar screamed. A glass shattered on the floor. "Federal agents," Marcus said sharply, his voice cutting through the chaos. "FBI. My credentials are in my jacket pocket." But Rodriguez had already yanked Marcus's arms behind his back, the click of handcuffs loud in the sudden silence. The metal was cold, too tight, biting into his wrists. "Sure you are," Thompson laughed, but there was uncertainty in it now. "And I'm the president." "Check the wallet," Damon said, his voice deadly calm despite Thompson's gun pointed at his chest. "The credentials are right there." "Anybody can buy a fake badge online," Rodriguez said, but his aggressive confidence was wavering. "Call it in," Marcus said, forcing authority into his voice despite the handcuffs, despite the position. "Badge number Alpha 7792, Special Agent Williams, Organized Crime Division. My brother is Special Agent Damon Williams, Alpha 7793. Thompson hesitated. The smart move would be to verify. The safe move. But he'd already gone too far. Drawn his weapon, made a scene. To back down now would be to admit error. And Marcus could see in his face that Officer Thompson wasn't a man who admitted error easily. "We'll sort this out of the station," Thompson decided. "If you're really FBI, which I doubt, then you've got nothing to worry about." They marched them out of the bar, past the silent witnesses, past the bartender, whose kind eyes now held a mixture of anger and helplessness. The rain had started again, light but steady, turning the neon lights into watercolor smears. Rodriguez pushed Marcus toward the police car too hard, causing him to stumble. "Watch the head," Thompson said, mockingly, as he guided Marcus into the back seat, not gently. The door slammed shut with finality. Damon was pushed into the car moments later, his jaw tight with controlled fury. They sat in the dark, hands cuffed behind their backs, rain pattering on the roof. Through the wire mesh, they could see the three officers conferring, Rodriguez gesticulating animatedly, Thompson looking less certain by the minute. "Should have shown the badges," Damon muttered. "When?" Marcus asked. "When he called us boys? When he accused us of crimes we didn't commit? When would showing those badges have mattered to him?" Damon didn't answer because they both knew the truth. There was no right moment. There was no perfect time when their credentials would have prevented this. Thompson had seen what he wanted to see, what he'd been trained to see, what society had told him to see. Two black men who didn't belong. Inside the bar, someone had finally called someone. Marcus could see the bartender on his phone, his face grim. Others were recording now, phones out, the modern witness to injustice. But it was too late for prevention. Now it was just about documentation. Thompson returned to the car, his face a mask of professional indifference, but Marcus caught the tightness around his eyes. He'd made the call. He knew. The drive to the station took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of silence except for the rain and the occasional crackle of the radio. 12 minutes for Thompson to figure out how to spin this. 12 minutes for Rodriguez to realize his eager aggression might just have ended his career. 12 minutes for Marcus and Damon to sit in handcuffs, knowing that their federal authority meant nothing in the back seat of a police car. The station was a squat brick building that looked like every other small precinct in America. Functional, forgettable, fluorescent lit. They were brought in through the back entrance, away from the public eye. The booking area was nearly empty. Just one other person being processed for what looked like a DUI. "Sit," Thompson ordered, pointing to a bench. They sat. The handcuffs had been on for 20 minutes now, and Marcus's shoulders were starting to ache from the unnatural position. Across from them, a clock ticked with metronomic persistence. 10:34 p.m. A door burst open. Captain Janet Morrison strode through, her face a storm of barely controlled fury. She was followed by two men in suits. FBI suits, Marcus recognized immediately. Special Agents Chen and Kowalski from the local field office. "Uncuff them," Morrison ordered, her voice ice. "Now." Thompson fumbled for his keys, suddenly clumsy. The cuffs came off, and Marcus resisted the urge to rub his wrists. He and Damon stood slowly, with dignity. "Special Agents Williams," Chen said formally. "I apologize for this misunderstanding." Misunderstanding, Damon repeated, his voice flat.
Captain Morrison turned to Thompson, and her voice dropped to a register that made everyone in the room unconsciously step back. "My office, all three of you, now." As Thompson and his partners filed past, Rodriguez couldn't meet their eyes. The youngest officer looked like he might be sick. Thompson's jaw was set, defiant even in his error. He'd justify this somehow, Marcus knew. In his report, in his mind, he'd find a way to make himself the hero of this story. "We'll need your statements," Chen said quietly. "This will be investigated fully." "We were just having a drink," Marcus said, and exhaustion colored his words. "We were off duty, observing the community for the Torelli investigation, and we were just having a drink." Chen's face was grim. "I know. Morrison knows. Soon, everyone will know." The next 3 hours were a blur of statements, paperwork, and carefully controlled anger. Internal Affairs was called. The FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility was notified. By 2 a.m., the story had leaked to the media. By dawn, it would be national news. Marcus and Damon finally left the station at 1:47 a.m., driving back to Arlington in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining like black mirrors. Neither of them spoke until they were back in Marcus's apartment, standing in the same spot where they'd stood that afternoon, looking at their reflection in the hallway mirror. 10 years, Damon said quietly. Marcus nodded. 10 years of service. 10 years of putting their lives on the line. 10 years of being the good guys. And yet, for 2 hours tonight, none of that had mattered. They'd just been two black men in the wrong place, which was apparently any place where men like Thompson held power. "Chen wants us to take a few days," Marcus said. "Process this." "Process," Damon laughed bitterly. "How do you process being reminded that no matter how high you climb, someone can always drag you back down?" Marcus didn't have an answer. Instead, he picked up his FBI credentials from where he'd thrown them on the hall table. The gold badge caught the light, eagle wings spread in eternal vigilance. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. He'd lived by those words for a decade. Tonight he'd learned that sometimes they weren't enough. His phone buzzed, a text from Chen. "The bar's security footage is already online, the whole thing. Thompson didn't know they had cameras." Marcus pulled up the video, watched himself being handcuffed, marched out like a criminal. The comments were already pouring in, outrage, support, but also the inevitable skeptics who would find a way to blame them. They should have complied faster. They should have announced themselves sooner. They should have. "What are you thinking?" Damon asked. Marcus set down his phone, met his brother's eyes in the mirror. "I'm thinking about Mom, what she used to say about dignity." "They can take everything else," Damon quoted, "but dignity is yours to keep or give away." We kept ours tonight. Did we? Damon's reflection looked older somehow, worn down by more than just the late hour. Or did we just play their game by their rules? "We survived it," Marcus said, "with our integrity intact, with evidence of what really happened, with the system, flawed as it is, working to hold them accountable." "The system," Damon repeated, "the same system that put us in those handcuffs." They stood there in silence, two reflections of the same man, shaped by the same experiences, but processing them differently. Marcus, ever the optimist, believing in the possibility of change from within. Damon, the realist, understanding that some changes had to be forced from without. "What do we do now?" Damon asked. "Now?" Marcus picked up his badge again, turned it over in his hands. The gold badge caught the light, eagle wings spread in eternal vigilance. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. The hearing was held 3 weeks later in a federal building downtown, all marble and massive windows that let in light but no warmth. Marcus and Damon sat in the gallery, their dress uniforms immaculate, their faces composed. They weren't required to attend, but Chen had thought it important that they be there. To see justice done, she'd said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced justice was what they'd witness. Officer Thompson sat at the defendant's table, his lawyer beside him. Rodriguez and the third officer, Patterson, were seated separately. They'd taken plea deals, suspensions without pay, mandatory retraining. They'd thrown Thompson under the bus, claiming they were just following their senior officer's lead. It was probably true, but it was also convenient. The federal prosecutor, a small woman named Sarah Kim with a voice that could fill a courtroom, laid out the case methodically. The video evidence, the witness statements, the clear violation of the Williams brothers' civil rights. She painted a picture of abuse of power, of prejudice masquerading as police work, of the thin blue line becoming a wall between citizens and their rights. Thompson's lawyer, expensive, Marcus noted, probably paid for by the police union, painted a different picture. A veteran officer trying to keep a neighborhood safe. A misunderstanding escalated by the agent's failure to immediately identify themselves. A good cop making a split-second decision in an uncertain situation. My client has served this community for 18 years without a single complaint, the lawyer said, which was a lie so bold that Marcus saw several reporters in the gallery start typing furiously on their phones. Thompson had 14 complaints, 2 suspensions, and had cost the city 3 settlements. But those records had been sealed, buried, forgotten, until tonight's incident had given prosecutors reason to dig. When Thompson himself took the stand, he was everything Marcus had expected. Contrite, but not really. Apologetic, but only for the misunderstanding. Adamant that race had played no role in his actions. "I treat everyone the same," Thompson said, looking directly at the judge. "Black, white, brown, it doesn't matter to me. I saw 2 strangers acting suspiciously, and I investigated. That's my job." "And what was suspicious about their behavior?" Kim asked on cross-examination. "They were alert, watching everyone." "Alert," Kim repeated. "Is being alert a crime, Officer Thompson?" "No, but in context." "What context? The context that they were 2 black men in a predominantly white establishment?" "Objection," Thompson's lawyer called out. "Prejudicial." "Sustained," but the point had been made. The security footage was played in its entirety. 37 minutes of video that showed Marcus and Damon doing nothing more threatening than drinking water and 1 beer. It showed them complying with every order, moving slowly, announcing their status as federal agents. It showed Thompson's hand moving to his weapon before any gun was mentioned. It showed Rodriguez's aggressive search, his triumphant shout when he found Marcus's service weapon. In the gallery, Marcus watched Thompson watch himself on the screen. For just a moment, he thought he saw something cross the officer's face. Not remorse exactly, but maybe recognition. Maybe for the first time, Thompson was seeing what everyone else saw. But then his lawyer whispered something in his ear, and his face reset to defiant neutrality. The judge, Honorable Michael Chen, no relation to their supervisor, took 3 days to deliver his verdict. 3 days during which the media dissected every frame of video, every word of testimony. 3 days during which Marcus and Damon continued their investigation into the Torelli family, their focus sharpened by a need to prove that they were more than just victims, more than just a headline. When the verdict came, it was both victory and defeat. Thompson was found guilty of violating their civil rights, of illegal detention, of conduct unbecoming an officer. He was sentenced to 18 months probation, 300 hours of community service, and permanent removal from the force. No jail time, no real consequences beyond losing a job he should have lost years ago. Captain Morrison implemented new training protocols, brought in community liaisons, made all the right noises about change and progress. Murphy's Tavern removed the thin blue line flag that had hung behind the bar for years, replacing it with a simple sign, All are welcome here. But the real resolution came 6 weeks later, when Marcus and Damon's investigation into the Torelli family culminated in 17 arrests, including 2 city councilmen and a deputy police chief. The corruption ran deep, deeper than anyone had suspected, and at the center of it was evidence that Thompson himself had been taking money to look the other way when Torelli shipments came through Riverside Heights. He knew, Damon said, sitting in Marcus's apartment with the case file spread across the coffee table. When he walked into that bar, Thompson knew we were FBI. Someone tipped him off that federal agents were sniffing around. He was trying to scare us off. Or he was testing us, Marcus suggested, seeing if we'd flash our badges, blow our cover. Either way, he was dirty. They'd never be able to prove it. Thompson's connection to the Torelli family was buried under layers of intermediaries and cash payments. But they knew. And Thompson knew they knew. His 18 months of probation had become a federal investigation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Justice, Marcus reflected, didn't always come in the form you expected. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, thorough. Sometimes it was the slow dismantling of a corrupt system rather than the dramatic takedown of a single bad actor. On the last day of the Torelli investigation, after the final arrest had been made and the last report filed, Marcus and Damon returned to Murphy's Tavern. It was a Thursday night, quieter than that Saturday 2 months ago. The same bartender was there, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw them. "Agents Williams," he said, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "Welcome back. First round's on the house." They took the same corner booth, ordered the same drinks, water for Marcus, beer for Damon. The bar was different now. Or maybe they were different. The patrons nodded to them, some offering quiet words of support, others just acknowledging their presence with respect rather than suspicion. "You know what Mom would say about all this?" Damon asked, raising his beer. Marcus raised his water glass, clinked it against his brother's. "She'd say we did our job. Both jobs. The one that pays us, and the one that pays nothing but costs everything. The job of being black in America. The job of making it better for the next ones." They drank in comfortable silence, 2 brothers who had faced injustice and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Outside, Riverside Heights went about its evening routines. Kids playing, elderly women watering flowers, men washing cars. Normal things in a normal neighborhood where for a brief moment the abnormal had been exposed and excised. Change would come slowly, Marcus knew. It always did. But it would come, one investigation at a time, one corrupt cop at a time, one moment of justice at a time. And he and Damon would be there for it, badges in their pockets and dignity in their hearts, serving and protecting even those who didn't think they needed or deserved it. Because that's what real justice looked like. Not the dramatic gavel bang of a harsh sentence, but the quiet persistence of good people refusing to let bad systems win. The story of Marcus and Damon Williams forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth that lives in the space between authority and accountability, between the badge that should protect and the bias that still persists. It asks us to consider, in a nation where federal agents can be reduced to suspects based on nothing more than the color of their skin, what does justice really mean? Think about Thompson for a moment. 18 years on the force, 14 complaints buried in sealed records, 3 settlements paid out with taxpayer money. How many Marcus and Damon stories happened before that night at Murphy's Tavern? How many people without federal badges, without the protection of the Bureau, without security cameras capturing every moment, how many of them had their dignity stripped away with no recourse, no vindication, no witness but the silence of those too afraid to speak? The Williams brothers were lucky, if you can call it that. They had badges to eventually flash, a federal system to back them up, body camera footage that couldn't be denied or destroyed. But what about the construction workers at Murphy's that night, who turned away rather than risk becoming the next target? What about the nurses who kept their heads down, knowing they'd have to drive these same streets tomorrow? What about every person who's ever felt that moment of cold recognition that no matter what they've achieved, someone with a badge and a bias can reduce them to a stereotype in seconds? This isn't just a story about two FBI agents who faced injustice. It's about the fault lines that run through our society, the assumptions we make, the power we give, and the accountability we too often fail to demand. It's about the difference between the law as it's written and justice as it's lived. So here's the question we must ask ourselves. If federal agents with 10 years of service, with exemplary records, and the full weight of the FBI behind them, can be handcuffed and humiliated based on nothing more than their presence in a space someone deemed wrong for them, what chance does anyone else have? What would you have done in that bar that night? Would you have been the patron who recorded everything on your phone, creating the evidence that would later matter? Would you have been the one who looked away, choosing safety over solidarity? Or would you have been the bartender, making that difficult phone call, knowing it might cost you customers, but unable to stay silent? These aren't comfortable questions, but comfort isn't what changes systems. Change comes from the Marcuses and Damons who keep serving despite being shown they're not always protected by the very system they protect. It comes from the Captain Morrisons who implement real training instead of empty gestures. It comes from the witnesses who refuse to let injustice pass unrecorded. And perhaps most importantly, it comes from all of us who hear these stories and refuse to let them be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. If this story moved you, if it angered you, if it made you think about the distance between the America we claim to be and the America we are, then carry that with you. Share this story, start conversations, ask the uncomfortable questions in your own communities. Because somewhere tonight, in a bar or a street corner or a traffic stop, another Marcus and Damon story is happening. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us are watching, recording, speaking up, maybe the next story will end differently. Consider subscribing to hear more stories that challenge us to see beyond the headlines, to understand the human cost of systemic failures, and to recognize that justice isn't a destination we've reached, but a journey we're still on. In our next story, we'll explore what happens when those sworn to protect become the very danger they were meant to prevent, and how ordinary people can become extraordinary in their pursuit of truth. Remember, dignity isn't given or taken, it's held. And sometimes holding on to it in the face of those who would strip it away is the greatest act of courage there is.